Hi everyone, it's Katie, and today I'm going to be doing a comparison video between the second edition of the self-published Anna K Tarot and the Llewellyn edition of the Anna K Tarot. This is something I asked you guys whether you wanted to see, and I had a resounding yes. The Anna K is a very, very popular and beloved tarot deck, and I'm definitely amongst its top fans. It's been a deck ever since I bought the Llewellyn Edition a few years ago. It's been one that I regularly use for all sorts of things, for readings for myself, readings for others. A lot of my therapeutic tarot stuff I do with the Anna K because of its beautiful storybook sort of imagery. So basically Anna K self-published her deck, and there was another edition before this one. That its printing was a bit lighter and its cardstock a bit thinner. I think that is the information that I've read online, but obviously I don't have that deck to compare. The person I traded with to get this deck does have the first edition, but it's a bit more beat up, and she did say that the cardstock and everything didn't feel quite as good quality as this one. And this one, I think last I checked, it was like about 6 months ago though, you could still buy this one from Anna K from her website. I don't know if that's still the case, so you know, check that before you get too excited, but I'll leave a link to her website below. But obviously this one is very much in print and available widely as it is published by Llewellyn. So obviously our first thing that we notice is the boxes are very different. Now I'm going to refer to this one just as the self-published edition going forward. I know there is more than one, but I've specified that this is the second. So it comes in this kind of, it's still cardboard, but it's fairly sturdy cardboard. And this is the backing. And it's a pretty kind of like compact little box, which is kind of nice. It's very pretty. So it lifts off like this, and we have the guidebook on the inside. Now I haven't read all the way through. I have actually read the entire Anna K guidebook from the Llewellyn edition, and from what I've gleaned in my brief time with this, it's basically the same guidebook. The Llewellyn edition is just kind of filled out with a lot more white space and whatnot. This is still 80 pages and it seems to be basically the same content. So you do get the really wonderful, I love the guidebook that comes with the Anna K. I think she's just kind of like simplified everything and made it really clear, and I think that's why it's such a favorite with so many people. And then underneath we have the cards, and they're kind of divided into this little two separate pockets. I actually kind of like, I don't mind this specific setup. I would prefer just to have the cards in one pile, although I understand why they do this. It's easier to package and distribute. But what I will say is that I like that there's not so much room that the cards are moving around too much, but there is enough room to kind of get your finger in here and take the cards out. So just a little thing, I know, but that is something that I noticed and that I quite like about this packaging. Now we'll take a bit of a look at the Llewellyn edition. Obviously this box is a lot bigger, it's a lot chunkier. I will just say I know Llewellyn has made quite a few changes to their cardstock and boxes over the past couple of years. I actually haven't bought a new Llewellyn deck in at least a year, so I don't really know what the deal is, if there's a new kind of printing of the Llewellyn edition of the Anna K. This one I bought, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, so if there have been changes, you know, that might be something you want to consider, but this is just as far as, you know, the 2 editions that I have. And this is what's on the back, which is very cute. And it's kind of made to look like a bit of a box, like it's wooden sort of look, kind of. And it opens up like this. The cards, I don't love the Llewellyn setup. I don't generally keep my cards in here. I tend to put them in a bag. I keep most of my cards in boxes, but these Llewellyn boxes are just a bit of a pain. But anyway, this is what happens. The book has that really lovely kind of like soft mattish, I don't know what this is called, but it's a really nice feeling book. and it's pretty chunky. It has 230 pages, but as you can see, it's not like the amount of writing hasn't really changed. We do just get like a full-size picture, a reproduction of the image of each card, and then there's also like little notes pages every now and then. I won't be able to find one now that I've said that, but there's heaps of white space and it's very spaced out in terms of its layout. So it's not so much the content that has changed, more just the layout of the book. But it is pretty cool that we get a full representation, which does make it easier if you want to kind of read this, you know, separately. So we have quite a few of these note pages, which kind of fills it out. But it is a nice little book, and I really, as I said, I really like the companion book for the Anna K Tarot. Our cards kind of are supposed to sit in here, but don't really do so well. So now that we've kind of had a bit of a look at that, it's time to look at the cards. So I'm going to keep the self-published edition here on this side on the left and the Llewellyn on the right. I don't know if you guys can tell from this angle, but already the self-published edition is like standing quite a lot taller. It's thicker basically than the Llewellyn. It's a lot thicker, but it's also smaller in terms of the card size. They both have the same backing, which I was really happy about because I really like this backing. Obviously the other thing I will note is I have edged my Llewellyn edition in black. I haven't done anything to the self-published edition just yet. So the colours are fairly similar. Overall though, I will say that the Llewellyn is lighter. I think they've definitely kind of upped the brightness and maybe even the contrast a little bit. But they're both really beautiful editions. I love them both. So let's turn it over, that might be easier. The cardstock, well, the size of the cards are the first things you kind of notice. The self-published is quite a bit smaller, although it's not, if we kind of center it, it's not a huge amount smaller in terms of like the image. It is a little bit. The Llewellyn still is stretched out a little bit more, but of course it doesn't have this black border. They do have these kind of smaller colored borders, and they are different colors. And then we have the king written up here with a circle which denotes the pentacles, so it's the King of Pentacles, as opposed to the Llewellyn, which has King of Pentacles written very, very clearly in the black border. As for the card stock, my Llewellyn is that very, very bendy, flexible, fairly thin, but it still feels pretty sturdy cardstock. I will say that I noticed quite a bit of chipping very quickly with mine. You can't notice it so much now that I've edged it, because I did kind of like edge the fronts a little bit too. Like I let the ink kind of run over onto the front to cover up all those little chips. Yeah, so I mean, I don't have anything wrong with this card. Like I don't dislike this cardstock. It's kind of got a bit of a shine. They're kind of a bit slippery, but not too much. This cardstock, however, it almost feels a little bit more slidey. I don't know, maybe not quite, but it is a lot thicker. It's much more like cardstock, and even though it still has a sheen, it's less evident here as on the Llewellyn. So I really quite like this cardstock. I know some people have complained that it's a little bit too thick. I like both, to be honest. I do really like, there's something about this smaller card that I'm really into though. This is a lightly used edition, so we can see a bit of like, I wouldn't call it chipping, but you know, little knocks that makes the edges, you can kind of see a bit of white around the edge, because the person who had this before me did really love it and use this deck. I have used my Llewellyn quite a lot, as I've said before. So now let's flip them over and have a bit of a look at the wonderful cards. So basically, I think Llewellyn have done a great job of reprinting this deck. You know, that's always a bit of a worry, I think, when a beautiful self-published deck is picked up by a mass market publisher. You're not really sure what you're going to get. And I really, really love this self-published edition, but I'm also really happy with my Llewellyn. And I do think that they did a really great job of reproducing the Anna K. Overall, basically what I will say is that the major differences are, of course, the borders and the sizes. And then the Llewellyn has just been brightened up a little. Kind of the smaller things, it's very hard for me to show you. Some cards are a little bit more obvious than others, but in order to get these kind of square corners on the images on the Llewellyn, they have very, very slightly cropped the images. So in a couple of images, it's very hard to tell in this fill card, but in a couple of the images you do notice, if there's something very obvious that might be, cut off a little bit, but it's not to the extent where I feel like you're really missing out on the image. But yeah, as you can see, I hope you can see that the colors are ever so slightly different. This just feels like, I don't know, just brightened up, like, yeah, you've kind of upped the exposure a little bit on this. And I've used and loved the Llewellyn for so long, but I do, and some of the cards are a little bit darker and a little bit harder to see in the original, in the self-published, but equally sometimes I think there's a bit more mood and atmosphere to them, and sometimes even details are a little bit easier to see. Here we have our Magician. I do kind of really enjoy like the different border colors. The borders are still small and really unobtrusive, but there's something quite cute about them. I think this is a pretty clear one where you can see that the brightness is upped quite a bit in the Magician on the Llewellyn. Like the blue is almost a purple in the self-published. Not quite, but almost, especially in comparison to this one. Now for our beautiful High Priestess. And the Empress. Apparently, from the very first edition, this is the second, there were some artistic changes made on the cards, and the Empress was one of them. I think her dress was shorter or something like that, whereas in this one, it's basically the same as the Llewellyn deck, just published by Llewellyn. Our Emperor. The High Priest, or the Hierophant, renamed the High Priest in this deck. The Lovers. I loved this Lovers card. This was kind of one of the first times I really kind of got the Lovers card. I knew it and I could read it, but this deck really helped me establish my own understanding of the Lovers card that I was really comfortable with. And I don't know if you can see, but especially with the sky, the yellow in the background, you can kind of see that there's a bit more of a gradient in the self-published, and you can still see that in the Llewellyn, although I don't think I really noticed it until I realized that it was there when I saw this edition. But it's such a lovely card. And our Chariot. The sky just looks a whole lot more dynamic and detailed and rich in the self-published, but also a lot brighter in the Llewellyn. So I guess it just kind of depends on your own personal taste. I don't have a clear, obvious favourite between the two, to be honest. There are things I like about each of them. Hermit. I know this is a Hermit card a lot of people really, really love, and with good reason. I think in this one you can see pretty clearly that it is quite a bit darker in the self-published. Wheel of Fortune, another card that I love. Such a beautiful strength card too. The Hanged Man, he looks so grumpy. Death. I love this Death card. Temperance. The devil. Oh, there's so much I love about this deck. It's just so evocative and readable. The Tower. The Star. Now, I love the Star, Moon, and Sun in the Anna Kay. I love their simplicity. However, in the very first publishing, the Star, Moon, and Sun were different. They had people in them. So yeah, that's the thing. And I'm really curious. I mean, I'm not going to go out and spend a whole lot of money on it because I already have 2 copies. But if I ever had the opportunity to have the first edition, I would do so, just because it is one of my favorite decks, and I would find it quite interesting to kind of explore how those few changes in some really big cards may or may not affect how I read and work with the deck, or the overall feeling of the deck. You can see that this looks a lot more like nighttime, and this looks almost like the full moon, with how bright the sky is and how much reflection there is on the water and the sun. Judgment. And the beautiful, wonderful World card. Okay, now we have the Swords. I am going to go through this whole deck. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I've often been asked to do a walkthrough of the Anna Kay. So here you have it. You get a double walkthrough in one go. Now this is kind of one of the ones where you can see where the Llewellyn has cut it off slightly in order to achieve those kind of sharp corners, whereas this one has round. They kind of had to cut off the image very slightly, but as I said, it is very slight, and it's things like, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but in this one you can see where that tile ends and there's a new one beginning just before the border starts, whereas in the Llewellyn it's kind of cut back just before the new tile would start. So I mean, I think it's helpful to, that is a pretty clear indication of the fact that they have trimmed it, but they've kept that trimming to the minimum, and it's not something that you notice throughout the deck very much at all. And I certainly don't feel as though, you know, bits are missing. Same as down the bottom. I don't know, you can just kind of see how we have almost, we get to see the whole shell, the bottom of the shell before the border, whereas on the Llewellyn, you know, the border kind of skims the bottom of the shell. So it is very slight, and it's not something that I noticed or that bothered me. The other thing is with the titling of the cards, we have the number, or if it's the name, if it's a king or a queen or whatever, and then a very, very small symbol for the suit. Whereas on the Llewellyn we have it very clearly printed on the black border. For the minors, all of the swords have this kind of grey blue around them. So they're also color coded. The major arcana are all different colors, whereas the suits each have their own color. 3 of Swords. I think this was another one where I noticed it, where we're kind of like missing a tree in the Llewellyn edition. If you can see this kind of really skinny tall point, we don't have that at the edge of the Llewellyn. But yeah, I probably won't point that out anymore, because, you know, if you go looking for it, you'll see it. But I don't think it cuts anything important out. It doesn't affect the readability or the usability of the deck. You're not missing out on any key elements. See, cards like this, I actually really quite like that they're darker, because I think one of the things I like so much about the Anna Kay is the fact that she's used light to really portray mood. And so in that sense, these darker, kind of less well lit images, they are more moody and atmospheric. So I kind of do like that I always find it interesting. I think I remember reading on her website that she kind of did point out that Llewellyn had brightened their edition up, and it was more bright than she would have wanted. She created this the way that she wanted it, but still recognizing that they did a pretty damn good job with that beautiful book and everything. And the fact that they have kept these borders, they're black, they're thin, they're unobtrusive. I love this card. It's one of my favorite Eight of Swords. I think a lot of people say that because it is different to what we see and yet very recognizable. Just a very simple, clever take on the Eight of Swords. Ten of Swords is another card that I love. It's like he has been stabbed in the back, but he had to rip those swords out for himself. I don't know, there's something pretty powerful about that. Then we have the Courts, which is another reason that I love the Anna Kay so much, is because of the court cards. And why I recommend this deck for beginners, especially if you are kind of struggling with the court cards, or cards in general, if you're kind of like me and you overcomplicate things, especially when there's a lot of occult symbolism. I love this Queen of Swords. Kind of feeling like you have to understand all of the correspondences and associations with all of the different symbols and color use and all of that in the Rider-Waite-Smith. The Anna Kay is very Rider-Waite-Smith, but it also really strips it all back. It takes out all of that occult symbolism and uses color and light and body language and facial expressions to convey the same meaning, which makes it a lot more accessible. So if you're like me and you kind of overthink things, this might be a really great deck for you. I certainly found it a really useful one for me in getting my head around some of those cards that I was struggling with, and also just getting really comfortable with the cards that I already, was pretty comfortable with. There's a lot of movement in this deck too. I like this Eight of Rods. I love some of the facial expressions in this deck. And one of the criticisms of this deck is that it's not very pretty. And I get that because I tend to like quite pretty decks, don't I? But that's part of its charm. That even though it's a little bit fairy tale, it kind of feels like it's set in a bit of a Renaissance fair almost. It's still really quite realistic. People aren't super pretty, especially when they're experiencing strong emotions. They pull funny faces and they look a bit distressed or whatever. There's also, while there's not a lot of racial or other kinds of diversities, like different genders represented or different sexualities, there is a really great diversity in terms of age. Especially in the major arcana, perhaps you notice, like the Lovers is an old couple who have been together for a long, long time. And there's also a bit of body diversity in terms of size and shape and all of that sort of stuff. So it's an interesting deck, and the people just look and feel a little bit more realistic than pin-up girls and things like that, which can get a bit tiresome. But I love this guy's face. Like, he just looks so some of these faces just crack me up. This is another one where I really feel like more of that darker mood and atmosphere is captured in the self-published. I just love this card. I just finished saying that this deck isn't always the prettiest deck. This is one of the prettiest Six of Cups. I love it. I really, really love this card. Seven of Cups. Another one I really, really like. 8 of Cups. And the 10, which is a little bit different to what we normally see, but I don't know, just like looking at her face and how serene she is, and obviously that big, big, bright sun and all those cups around her, we certainly still get that feeling of fulfillment and happiness and contentment. Page of Cups. The Knight of Cups is another one that in the very first printing has been changed. So I think from memory, in the very first printing, he basically didn't have all these roses around him. They were added for this edition and then kept for the Llewellyn edition, which I quite like. I mean, like, it's a bit over the top, but I think that's the point with the Knight of Cups. So I'm kind of into it. I love this Queen of Cups. Isn't she just beautiful? The King of Cups. I really like this king. I really like the courts in general in this deck. I think they're beautiful. They really kind of capture an image of a person or a personality or a behavior, or however you read them. I think they're really, really clear and beautiful. The Pentacles now have this kind of brown border around them. I love too how the aces have been made really clear too. I mean, the aces are always beautiful cards, but they're often quite pippish, aren't they? Even for those of us who like very scenic decks, often the aces remain very pippish. Whereas the Anna has really kind of brought her very scenic storybook imagery into the aces, which again is awesome, I think, especially for beginners. I just love the faces. Oh, it's such an expressive deck. A lot of people getting their hands literally in the dirt for the Pentacle suit, which I like. The Nine of Pentacles is one of my favorite cards in the tarot, and I do really like this one. This is a very sunny deck, especially like the Pentacles and the Rods, but just in general, there's a lot of very yellow cards. And the Ten of Pentacles, happy family. I love this Page of Pentacles. I love the pages in this deck. The Knight. Queen. And of course our King. So that is a bit of a walkthrough, a look at the Anna K, both the self-published and the Llewellyn editions. I know some of you won't find this stuff interesting, but I guess if you're still watching, then you obviously have. So yeah, a recap of the big differences. Cardstock, a lot thicker in this one, but the cards are smaller. The brightness is turned up in the Llewellyn. Obviously the borders are a bit different, as are the way the cards are labelled. And then the boxes obviously are different. And the books are laid out very differently, but maintain most of the same information. So both are great options, and I really don't think you can go wrong. As I said, I think they're both great decks. Obviously it's great that the Llewellyn is a whole lot more accessible. I mean, I got mine on Book Depository for like 28 bucks or something. The price does vary, but it's easy to get. I've seen it in shops, see it online all the time, and it's reasonably priced for what you get. The self-published obviously I think is a little bit more, and I think Anna is in Germany, or am I just making that up? She's in Europe anyway, so you know, depending on where you live, that might make it a little bit more inaccessible, and that is if she still is carrying the second edition. I know Llewellyn basically told her she could continue selling the self-published until she ran out of what she had. I haven't really decided if I'm going to keep both. It was more a curiosity because I love this deck so much, and I really like both editions, so we'll just see how I go. Yeah, I'm not really making any decisions right now, but they're both wonderful and I really like different things about each of them. But that is all from me. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you are new here, feel free to subscribe. I make a couple of videos every week and I love chatting with you guys in the comments. So feel free to talk to me down there and I will see you all again very soon. So much love, guys. Bye.